It's 6 o'clock in London by the time you watch this today. We're recording earlier, ladies and gentlemen. I'm afraid various schedule issues as we're going along today. It's 6 o'clock in London. It's 1 o'clock in New York, 7 o'clock in Central Europe. It is the middle of the night in Asia, and we are in, if you can see this today, ladies and gentlemen, the ICE House. We are in the ICE House Europe, no less, ladies and gentlemen. Our guest today will be with us in a second, Lucas Schmeddes. But let's just look at some of the big news of the week. It's been quite an incredible week as we start this Series 21, episode 04. That's episode number 124. Quite a boxy feat for those of you who remember it. Of course, the big news of the week in the parish was the fact that SBF was found guilty. Quite incredible in the end. The only shock in the whole trial was probably the fact that he ultimately ended up being found guilty by the jury in under 4 hours. Quite a record-breaking period of time. By the time they got through their coffee, their drinks, their mixers, and the biscuits, they really didn't take that long to reach a decision, ladies and gentlemen, did they? Of course, what was the fatal flaw of SBF's defense? Well, I think, as we all know, for at least all those of us who've spent those sorts of Sunday evenings in a dreary hotel room somewhere obscure where the only English language channel is True Crime, channel 7694, we would know that if you're a narcissist, you never, ever take the stand in your own defense. Meanwhile, interesting settlement news, a new rationale, a regime for soybean settlement. That is very interesting new collaboration. It's going to be between the Dalian Commodity Exchange and the Bursa Malaysia Berhad. At the same time, well, what a week it's been for short selling. This week began with South Korea banning short selling, but at the same time, Manila in the Philippines, after only, 27 years thinking about it, we finally managed to get short selling working in the Manila Philippine Stock Exchange. Our guest today, ladies and gentlemen, Lucas Schmeddes. Winter is coming is our theme today, because we're going to be looking very, very closely at the gas markets, because Lucas is the president and COO of ICE Endex, a leading energy exchange in continental Europe, under the umbrella, of course, of the Great Intercontinental Exchange, which sits right up there in tier 1 of Young's Pyramid of exchanges. ICE Endex provide liquid European gas emissions and power markets that enable energy firms, EU emissions trading system activity, the EU ETS, and all sorts of compliance entities and financial participants to effectively manage their risk transfer and the hedging of gas price risk. There's gas balancing markets, which we'll be getting to in a moment, in the Netherlands and the UK, OCM, which help ensure the distribution of gas to homes and businesses, something which I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, having spent a few weeks in the colder northern climes of late, gosh, gas is a wonderful thing for heating. From 2014 to 2022, Lucas was instrumental in launching ICE Futures Singapore and ICE Clear Singapore, and subsequently headed the exchange and clearinghouse as their president and COO. From 2007 to 2013, Lucas held the roles of Chief Operating Officer and Chief Financial Officer of ICE Endex and its predecessors. He had a little bit of time away from the whole organization, having held previously, actually, I should correct myself. Tell us your life story, Lucas. We don't need to know where in the world you are today, because as we can see, we are looking out onto this city of London and its magnificent wonderment, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are in the ICE House Europe. Lucas Schmeddes, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Patrick. I've been with Endex and predecessors of Endex for a long time, almost as long as I can remember. So back in the days, I think it's 2004, I started with a company at that time called the Amsterdam Power Exchange, and really looking at spot power products in the Netherlands, and having acquired 2 UK-based power exchanges and a UK-based gas exchange. I grew with the company. In 2008, APX acquired Endex, and it acquired Endex primarily for its TTF business.
Right.
TTF, the Dutch natural gas hub, was very promising, and the Dutch had the ambition to grow a trading hub around their presence in natural gas, and obviously we wanted to play a role in that gas hub by offering a derivatives exchange, but it's way harder than that. You can't just list a contract and hope the market will come. You need to make sure the bases are covered. So 2007 to I think around 2012, we really put in hard work to make that basis, to make sure that basis was there. And those are things that don't even relate to the derivatives contract itself. Things like gas quality. What is the gas quality that runs through the pipes in the Netherlands? And was important that it was just one type of gas quality. How do you nominate gas in the Netherlands? A very easy nomination process makes it a lot easier to trade. Single-sided nomination rather than doing an exchange trade and hoping that one side nominates the same as the other side. No, it was just one side nominating.
So help our audience here who might not all be specialist gas traders. Single-sided nomination, in other words, you're choosing your counterparty?
No, this is nomination towards the gas grid. So all of these are physically delivered molecules into the gas grid. So one part is the exchange, the trading. The other part is the actual gas, and that all needs to work. And one part was organizing the market and the trading, and the other part was that the process around the actual delivery was as smooth and as easy as possible. And that's where a lot of work between 2017 and 2012 got into. Also other things, credit arrangements with the grid operator, a lot of things. And then around 2011, 2012, we felt we started to get traction. We were not getting past the national balancing point in the UK, which was then the main hub for Europe, but we really felt we were getting traction. And then we realized, well, hold on, if we as Endex now are at the foundation of a derivatives contract for natural gas in the Netherlands that may be the benchmark for Europe, we will be competing with others.
So in the history, just one thing, when did Intercontinental Exchange enter the picture then?
So I think Intercontinental Exchange had launched their TTF contract a few years prior.
Right.
There was another exchange offering the TTF contract, which was EX, part of Eurex, Deutsche Börse, and at that time also CME had an interest in TTF. So yes, we were well positioned. We cracked the code. We were on a path to success, but we also realized we were going to compete with ICE, with Eurex, with CME. And it dawned upon us that we had the momentum, and we need to find an appropriate partner to really scale up the business, derivative style.
But it's very interesting nonetheless, because you managed to make a remarkably successful business effectively on not quite a mono product, but you had essentially, APX, if I remember correctly, you were mostly doing electricity, is that correct?
Yes, that's
APX.
correct.
Then you moved into the gas business, but at the same time, you didn't have a massive gas electricity benchmark or electric benchmark, oil benchmark behind you, because obviously Brent crude, which was sitting in ICE, and of course CME, which is sitting with West Texas Intermediate, or at least the Cushing version of West Texas Intermediate. That's a whole different discussion for another day. It's quite remarkable how successful Endex was as an independent entity, even though you identified the need to grow further with a partner.
Indeed, and I think part of our success was us being ingrained in the Dutch landscape. Right. At the time, GasUnie was shareholder. That also helped in making sure we had the right preconditions set. But yeah, we knew we were going to compete with the likes of ICE, who do have the other benchmarks listed next to there. So it was at that point in time that we said we need to find a partner, and to cut a long story short, that became ICE, and together with ICE, it has become the global gas benchmark that it is today. But mind you, 2012, we were doing, I think, around 2,000 lots per day. We were very proud.
Okay.
If you look at today's volume, it's a good number, but it's completely dwarfed if you look at let's say October ADV volumes of 300,000 lots. Completely different order of magnitude, and that shows what has happened in the 10 years after, together with ICE, under ICE. TTF really has grown to a global benchmark that is well recognized across the globe.
So it's very interesting. I mean, you've become absolutely a global benchmark, but you're still based in Amsterdam. You're still based in Holland. What's the rationale? How does Holland manage to be such a good place to be a benchmark for gas trading? I mean, say it's obvious with somewhere like Houston, for example, if you're going to deliver your oil in there because there's so much oil space in order to manage to store. What makes Amsterdam or Holland so important?
Well, so part of it relates to the history as I just described, right? So at that point in time, the jury was still out there. We obviously had MVP with the incumbent position.
Yes.
We had Germany, which is also a very large gas country, a lot of consumption, and then the Netherlands with its own gas supply, the infrastructure. I think it's a mix of credibility, robustness of the trade supporting infrastructure that finally made a difference. And then, as you also know, once you start getting that traction, liquidity begets liquidity.
Yes.
And once it's solidly there, then it's just making sure you grow it, you nurture it, you surround it by products that reinforce the offering and make it even better and easier for your market participants to trade and to use. But I think at its core is the trust in the underlying infrastructure, both from a trading perspective. The Dutch are a very trade-minded, trade-minded folk, and also the trust in the underlying gas infrastructure and rules, etc.
Well, I mean, by no means would anybody seek to deprecate the Dutch trading mentality. We'll get to that in just a moment, actually, with our book of the week. But there is obviously core huge financial center between Amsterdam and Rotterdam. You've got hundreds of years of stock market, commodity market, exchange history, which are all very key. Good banking market. I'm just curious because I suppose in some ways you would think, well, how come that market didn't end up being balanced in somewhere like Germany, which is, let's face it, 8 times the population of Holland?
Indeed.
It's an incredible testament to the way that you work. So walk us through TTF, because some of our viewers totally understand the whole idea of the facility. I think a lot of other people will find it quite illuminating the way that market actually balances out.
Okay, let me see where to start. Maybe the first thing to understand is that TTF is gas in the Dutch pipes, right? It's and the TTF contract, the ICE Endex TTF contract is the contract that basically prices gas in the Dutch pipes. So what does it mean? TTF, it's a virtual point. You can't really point it onto any geographical map, but it represents the Dutch natural gas grid, and it's a means for shippers to put gas onto the grid or take gas from the grid to ultimately deliver to consumers, etc., or to transport it to other places in Europe. So that's it in the essence. Now, why did it become so big? It's because of the things I just described. It's the credibility, it's the trust in and the ease of use of the TTF contract and how it can be traded, which feeds into a very robust price discovery process. And how it works in commodity markets is that you tend to get certain main price references hubs because the rest of Europe needs gas as well, right? And there's all kinds of hubs in Europe, typically styled very similarly to how TTF is organized, but how market participants manage the risk in relation to those other hubs is they cover the basis risk with TTF, because
Right.
it's a strong price formation. There is the liquidity, and that gives market participants the comfort to have their risk management approximately right. And next to that, they trade the differential between TTF
Yes.
and each of the other hubs. And that's how the industry has
Traditionally
organized
worked, yeah.
itself within Europe, and by extension, that's also how the industry has started to organize itself globally. If you picture a map, depending who plotted the map, obviously, but if you picture a map with Europe in the middle, and you recognize that global gas is a commodity that's either in pipes or somehow needs to be shipped, then it makes a lot of sense that TTF started to play its role also on a global level, with the US providing LNG, Australia providing energy, and other parts of the world actually needing to consume LNG.
Yes, and I mean, it's a very interesting point, because you said at the very start, there's a huge amount of difference in the quality of gas that you can get in different parts. There's also differences in the pipes that you can manage to put the gas through. But also you obviously have a big issue, because there's no such thing as a single global benchmark, because there's all of the interaction between the different oil and gas and markets, whether it's those oil markets we've mentioned earlier, or say JKM or something like that. It's a fascinating central balancing point. You've become the dominant benchmark for Europe, and therefore projecting that onto the world, because obviously Europe is still a massive economy and also has an incredible amount of gas usage, thanks to being somewhat in the northern end of the hemispheres of the world, perhaps not so acute in the likes of Holland, but certainly very, very acutely so in, say, Poland and the countries to the east of the European Union. You had quite a, how might one put it? I mean, they always go through these things where banks are always going through these shock tests and all these sorts of things, where the central bankers try to create an incredible maelstrom. You had one in real life relatively recently. I mean, obviously, the political events of Russia invading Ukraine, those are what they are, and that's a tragedy. But that must have been an incredibly life-affirming and motivating moment to see that the way that the gas market behaved.
Indeed. It was indeed a natural experiment, if you can call it like that, and it's in hindsight, it's funny in the sense that prior to the energy crisis, no one had really heard of TTF,
yes,
or no one had really heard of ICE Endex, and that has turned around tremendously. I would have liked to seen that turn around in a different way, but yes, you were right. We ran into the situation that because there was no longer Russian pipe gas, which the European economy relied heavily on, our markets were put to the test. And in this respect, it's also important to understand that, as I just mentioned, it's molecules in the grid.
Yes.
Molecules that flow, but the grid needs to remain pressurized. So that means you can't really store gas. Yeah, you can do it to some extent, but your storage capabilities are very limited, and your production capabilities are also very limited. And the place where you have the gas may not be the place where you need the gas.
Yes.
All of those things became very clear in in the last year, right? In the last winter, and because basically the demand is so inelastic.
Yes.
We've seen a tremendous increase in prices because people still needed gas, although there was way less gas available. So we don't want to take any Russian pipe gas anymore. We had physical constraints of getting gas from one country to the other, or to import LNG and to get it back into the pipe systems. So that led to very high prices, and when prices get very high, that's obviously going to hurt the Europeans, the citizens, the companies, and logically that is going to trigger a response by politicians, by policymakers. Hey, our citizens are hurting, our companies are hurting, we want to do something. So far we completely understand what was going on, where we were proud of how well our markets were functioning and being able to continue to produce a reliable price signal throughout this energy crisis. The high prices were actually hurting people, and that led to politicians, to policymakers wanting to step in and do something about it. And where it got difficult is they wanted to step into the market to prevent it from producing a high price.
Yes.
Where the role of the market is actually to facilitate a price discovery process. Right. And if you don't know the price of gas, you also don't know what you have to do to solve the problem of not having enough supply. Yeah. Yeah. So that has been a real life test, and it has been a test on our ability to deal with policymakers and politicians, and we've done a lot of explaining. And clearly we haven't done enough, otherwise we wouldn't be stuck with the market correction mechanism at this point in time. But I expect that we also still have a lot of explaining to do going forward.
But it's very difficult, as you say. I mean, let's face it, modern day electricity, gas markets and so on are really only about 20 years old. Barely that sort of age, and therefore a lot of people are not aware of the fact that they are so well pollinated across borders in Europe, etc. And that obviously led us to a problem. I mean, that's a generation which is, I might say this, you can possibly comment, but I always feel it takes politicians at least about 30 years to manage to get their heads around what it was that were done 30 years earlier. In cases of these sorts of what appear to be economic minutiae, but are obviously absolutely vitally important, because if you don't have central heating in your home, certainly in my home in Torun in Poland, then we're all going to freeze to death very, very rapidly come the end of this month. So there is obviously a problem, because it was kind of a new thing, I think, to some of the politicians. They really didn't even realize how they did. Some probably didn't realize the gas market existed. Most realized they existed, didn't really understand how it worked. Yeah. And that's obviously a problem to move forward. There is also the fact that obviously it must be very difficult, because politicians under stress, I mean, people under stress are not necessarily at their best for listening to complex explanations of balancing mechanisms and so on.
Indeed, and I guess the one thing we can say that stress was real. Yeah. And from that perspective, something like the market correction mechanism, an intervention of sorts, was probably inevitable. Having said that, it's still something that really worries us, or worried us at the time. We warned elaborately for the potential impact of having such ultimately a price cap in the market, and clearly we were not able to fully make ourselves heard or understood. We are fortunate today that the market trades at levels that are far away from the so-called trigger levels in the market correction mechanism. And to be honest, the market today behaves even as if there's no market correction mechanism. I also have to say the fundamentals look very very strong. We have full storages. In the meantime, in part because of the high prices, we've been able to make investments in LNG regasification capacity. There were clear signals in terms of demand destruction. So I think we are in way better shape than we were, let's say this time around last year. But the mechanism is still there, and all the things that we warned for can still happen. right? So what happens? I'm not going to explain the entire
mechanism,
but at one point in time we reach a price level, and at that price level the mechanism kicks in, and basically the exchange can no longer accept trades, and market participants can no longer put in trades, and basically
one-sided non-market.
We don't have a market, so we don't have a price signal, and then the big question is, how do you risk manage without a price signal?
Yes.
How do you transact without a market? And those are scary things, and so that brings me to the second thing that worries me about the MCM. It's not that things go bad when you hit the trigger. I fear that things will go bad before you hit the trigger, because any well-thinking risk manager will anticipate the market going up further at one point in time, and then it becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy.
We see that. I mean, the interesting politics of short-selling bans, we were talking about at the start with South Korea banning it and Philippines allowing it. If you look at short-selling bans, every time somebody bans short-selling, the market deteriorates, for the simple reason that people who see a short-selling ban think there must be something that they can't see. So they're actually still just selling what they already own in a panic situation.
Yeah.
So the market becomes, when the market is panicking, the slightest thing will knock it off. So, I mean, we see that across every possible kind of market. I think there's two things. I want to get back to the market correction mechanism in a minute, but actually you highlight a very interesting point, and it's something that I think we all ought to applaud, because it's very easy to complain about multinational corporations. And I don't mean multinational corporations with the agility and speed of intercontinental exchange, but people like Royal Dutch Shell, people like all of these other massive European energy makers, entities, some of them with major Dutch operations, some without. But everybody in that infrastructure has moved incredibly quickly. I mean, from last winter or 18 months ago, when we were looking at solid panic over what was going to happen, the actual physical gas situation on the ground has changed quite inexorably. And I think they deserve incredible plaudits. I mean, clearly they're hoping that they're going to make a profit, but nonetheless, we all know there's stories about, I mean, LNG barges, when they're huge gas tankers, I mean, they take whatever it is, a couple of miles to turn around. Multinational companies can be the same, and yet here we are only in effectively our second full winter, and the picture is so radically different structurally.
Indeed. So back to your early point. Something happened in the market, the type of thing you try to force upon yourself as a thought experiment. I don't think we specifically had done this thought experiment, but one thing is, I think market participants learned a lot and really deepened their appreciation of the risks associated with holding gas position and with covering them or not covering them. So I think has really been a deep learning experience for market participants, and yes, they obviously acted on those learnings, and that helps us being more robust as an energy infrastructure in Europe.
It's allowed the market to flourish, and as you say, 300,000 contracts. I mean, 2,000 a day was absolutely magnificent. That's certainly the number at which things turn off. And
we were so proud.
It's a great commodity market. I mean, you look at so many European commodity markets that have struggled to ever make 2,000 contracts a day. Yeah. It's interesting. So going back to the market correction mechanism, I don't want to get into the minutiae of it and so on, and the he said, she said, and so on. But you came up with a very, very interesting, how might we say, bifurcation strategy. To walk us through that, because essentially you kept your Dutch market as it was, but then you allowed the possibility that people could trade in London, which I know you didn't use in the end, but essentially you set up the structure in case.
Let me describe a bit about that, because prior to the actual mechanism coming into place, that there were all kinds of people weighing in on how they were going to intervene in the market, what was best for the market, etc. And at that point in time, and it was October last year, we thought, why don't we just ask the market how we should deal with certain so-called circuit breakers. At that point in time, things didn't look as grave as the market correction mechanism. how should we deal with intervening in the market from an exchange control perspective?
Right.
And so we issued a consultation to the market where basically we suggested to extend some of our circuit breakers to potentially take into account a longer reference period, so you would trigger more often, and also to take into account a longer hold period. So you would pause or at least prevent the market from moving in the wrong direction for a longer period of time. And the results of that consultation were actually they were surprising to me in the sense that the market was so resounding in giving us the signal that yes, triggering more often, well, we understand you do what you have to do, but holding the market, please do not do that. We need visibility on the price at any point in time. And I had not expected such a single voice from the market in relation to the holding period. And it was across the board. So it's utilities, it's funds, it's banks, it's prop firms. All of them were very clear in the signal. Don't stop the pricing. Okay, so I wanted to mention this because it's important. Important to explain why we chose the approach.
No, but I think this is very important because also those of us who've been inside that Brussels bubble of going to the European Union, one of the things we know is that also size matters because it's tradition. For example, exchanges traditionally have a problem because they turn up as maybe a maximum of 10 or 20 exchanges in a sector. Even in equities, there are barely 30 of them turning up at the European Union, Brussels. And the banks turn up, and they turn up with a bankers association, and they've got maybe 120 banks represented in the room, plus whoever else. So it's actually very useful because what you're telling me is effectively all human life, from the market makers on the very strictly technical side of making the market work, all the way through to the end manufacturers, and everybody who was involved in the gas business in between was saying they wanted a market, which is it's a great message. And underlines actually the fact that you're clearly doing your job, because if you can get all the people in the room, then your market is actually, in every sense, balanced with all participants.
Indeed. And that contributes to a high quality price. Right?
Yes.
All the different interests represented in a single price.
Yes, that's the most important word that I think you've said all day. I have many great words, Lucas. It's important between high and price. When you insert the word quality, then everything is good. That's really the vital part of what's going on. And, ladies and gentlemen, if you're looking at quality pricing, one of the best ways to learn about these markets is reading. Of course, naturally, I would advocate that you read Exchange Invest, the Bourse Bulletin of Monday through Friday. It's our subscription product. You can read all about the business of bourses. It's only $349 per user per year. A mere bagatelle in order to stay ahead of things like, well, we told you SBF was guilty a year ago. Good grief, we told you more than a year ago that SBF was going to go bankrupt. Those are just some of the things we've said in crypto. They're all manner of things that we've talked about in financial markets as a whole. As we look at the market structure, don't forget we also have a Saturday edition, which is completely free. If you want to sign up for either of those, and we include a 30-day free trial, you can do that at exchangeinvest.com. When you're thinking about visiting exchangeinvest.com, one of the good things that you get in the Saturday is you get a sneak preview of our book of the week. And this week, our book of the week, by absolutely beautiful mellifluousness, is a tale of the original Dutch stock market. It was written in, hold on for a second, 1688. I do not mean that our clock has gone badly wrong and it's sometimes after 5 p.m. We're talking 1688 AD. This is the original book of investing. It's the original book from a stock market floor. I think it's fascinating because actually last week's guest, Richard Sander, and I have talked about this quite often. We have the opportunity to go to different floors around the world. And when you look at the cameos, the vignettes that Joseph de la Vega wrote in this book in the 17th century, you can actually see the same people where there are trading floors to this day. They were such similar characters. At the time, the Amsterdam Bourse was a massive epicenter of European commodity trading, equity trading, bond trading. Good grief, they had things like single stock futures, which it took us another few hundred years to manage to get back onto exchanges at that point in time. Such an incredible book. Totally recommend it. It's available in a multiplicity of different editions. Joseph de la Vega's Confusiones de Confusiones. The good thing is Confusing de Confusiones is in English, ladies and gentlemen. Don't worry, it was originally written in Portuguese for some strange reason, because actually it mostly involves a series of Portuguese Sephardic merchants, which is a whole history in itself. Great book about the Bourse, and of course reminds us of the epicentral position that we've seen throughout history from the Dutch stock market and the Dutch markets as a whole, which brings us back to here we are. Winter is coming with Lucas Schmeddes, the head of ICE Endex. Well, I used that title, Winter is Coming, because I thought it was quite appropriate, because obviously, I mean, I'm not a huge Game of Thrones fan, but they did make quite a lot of it in Belfast, where I was born. But nonetheless, I think a lot of people have really panicked, and we're not in the business of market speculation or saying where the price is going to be. You're providing a quality marketplace. But it's incredible, given the fact that the initial panic after the Ukraine war broke out, the invasion took place. I mean, everybody thought we were going to be at utterly stratospheric gas prices. No, it's not the cheapest we've seen. It's far from it. But then on the other hand, we are in an inflationary economy at the moment, so there's been inflation across everything. How do you think the structure of this market is going forward? And do you think that there's going to be a situation where the market pricing mechanism might kick in?
So, okay, let me first respond with the fact that the market correction mechanism is a temporary mechanism that was installed beginning of this year, and is scheduled to end by the 31st of January.
Great.
And you're correct. I'm not in the business of predicting markets, and that it's quite funny that you say this, because that makes it difficult to engage with some of the relevant stakeholders in running the business. If you speak with the European Commission, people understand we organize a price discovery process, a quality price, etc. But they want to know. They want to know the answer to this question.
Yes,
right? Where are the gas prices going? And it's something that I find difficult to say. Right? I said before, I think fundamentals are incredibly strong, especially if you compare it to last year. And the market is trading as if there's no MCM. So inferring from all that, I don't think the market expects the MCM to trigger. But yet we are at war.
Yes.
So it and these are very delicate balanced systems that only require a small change, and because of the inelasticity, it may have a huge effect on price. I don't expect it. But we have to be realistic. Those are the circumstances that we face.
Right.
And then, as I said before, talking to stakeholders, they want me to explain why is the price today here, and the price. If I look at today's prices, we trade between 45 and 50 euros now, and people say, well. Maybe the Middle East conflict is an effect, and maybe the winter is softer than we expected, and the storages are full, etc. I think at this point in time, there's a lot of pluses and minuses that bring us to this 45 to 50 euro benchmark, which is roughly the same price point as where we expected the market to be right now 6 months ago.
Yes.
So there's a lot of tea leaf reading going on, and rightfully so, understandably so. But at one point in time, you also have to say, well, it's winter is coming.
Winter is coming,
and these are probably representative winter prices.
Yeah, and if anything, I think everybody's worked assiduously to try and be as prepared as possible for this winter in the structure of the market.
Yeah,
which does make it quite different. Really, really interesting. What do you see as being potential? I mean, are there potential threats to the TTF benchmark, either in Europe or elsewhere?
So Europe has done a tremendous thing with basically creating this benchmark, right? So we have gotten the rest of the world to accept onshore global gas pricing in euros.
Yes.
There are other jurisdictions, geographies that would bite off an arm to get into that same state. And I think by effort, by chance, we got there, and we really have a strategic asset in having the ability to use that TTF benchmark. And I think it's very well positioned, but we shouldn't do stupid things in relation to policymakers that undermine the market or the trust in the market. And what is always very important about the market, obviously the rules and the infrastructure needs to be right, but there also needs to be a long-term trust. On that point, and all of those things are very reassuring for the long-term trust in the TTF market, not by me, but by market participants, is we see increasing participation, right? So last year was a tough year. High prices made it more difficult to actually trade the contract, but we have more than recovered this year. We had a few record months this year. October was the second best month in the history of TTF, and contracts have traded out as far as 2032.
That's very interesting.
So technically we list to 2033. So I hope to be able to share something on a new record there soon. But that means that market participants are willing to commit their euros 10 years on. That far out.
That's a very interesting. I mean, actually, there's several things you just unpacked there, because I was just thinking of the headline numbers, and I know that, I mean, your growth has been something like 48% in the course of the last quarter. And I mean, ICE obviously had a spectacular third quarter results overall, and I'm sure that you feel very proud about what the ICE Endex team managed to produce in that growth of sort of 48%. But first of all, actually, I'm trying to rack my brains here. I'm trying to think, is there a bigger benchmark contract other than actually euro money that is denominated in euros? And I don't think there is. I think you've got the biggest commodity, biggest contract of anything other than literally the Euribor itself, which is obviously the pricing of euros, so therefore it has to be in euros. That's an incredible achievement. I hadn't really thought about that, given the fact that essentially every other benchmark out there is in US dollars, which is quite remarkable the world over. But it is interesting when you talk about the need to make sure that the market has its integrity going forward, and that's obviously a very concern. But this length, the duration, I mean, that's quite incredible. You look at how long it took, even with electronic markets, to build out the yield curve. And I mean, let's face it, the yield curve is a fundamental thing that they teach you in economics textbooks. You've got a much better qualification in economics than I have. But I mean, the economics textbooks always talk about the yield curve and so on and so forth. And here you've essentially got the better part of a 10-year yield curve building out in gas. That's absolutely incredible, actually.
Indeed, and I think that's the true testament to the trust in the TTF market. Now, I can tell you conceptually about, okay, what are the risks and what are your expectations, but it's the market that ultimately speaks and puts euros at risk and makes investment decisions on the basis of the TTF contracts.
And it's a fabulous fabric to the market, because therefore you've got people who are dealing essentially for the front month and essentially dealing somehow for spot. You've got people who are dealing somewhere in the future for some particular event point, and presumably then you've got every manner of spread taking place all the way out through what Indeed. Is therefore, I mean, a vast multitude of contract months. So you list quarterly, or how does it work in terms of the contracts?
So the TTF market consists of building blocks of monthly contracts.
Right.
And then every possible strategy is then constructed from those building blocks. So whether those are quarters, seasons, years, calendar spreads, as we just relaunched. The essence of gas trading, which was also not as well understood by the policymakers, but the essence of gas trading is basically shifting your gas portfolio forward and backwards in time. Sometimes also positions, geographically, as I explained earlier, for different reasons, so basis risk covering through TTF, and then having your actual risk somewhere else in Europe. But then, in terms of trading gas, gas traders are constantly rebalancing their position on the basis of news about the economy, the weather, etc., and they push their position backward in time or pull it forward, and that's why spreads trading is so important. And also that was not fully appreciated by, or at least in the wording of the market correction mechanism that talks about outright contracts and outright prices. No, what matters is the price high today compared to tomorrow, and what am I going to do about that? That's the platform we provide, and as I said, it's building blocks of months, but it's traded quite differently.
Yes, well, the difficulty is it's the headline news criteria, isn't it? The 9 o'clock news or the 10 o'clock news throughout the world, they'll all want to say the price of gas hit this height, and the truth is, the price of gas may be at that height for delivery tomorrow, but the delivery next week could be something completely different for 100,000 different possible reasons.
Well, it's even worse. You trigger me here. So headline news obviously is a great thing, and that needs to be exciting. I told you about the price discovery process and the education that we need to do towards stakeholders.
Yes.
So it's an exchange discovered price is commonly seen as the high watermark for price references. It's a price created on the basis of people willing to actually transact on it in euros, comparing that, for instance, to prices in illiquid market, which where you have nothing else available, and you need to estimate on the basis of opinion of people. So if you and I say, well, I think the price is X, and we take an average, that's also a means to achieve it. Obviously, the price reference based on actual transactions is likely to be more reliable. Now, we've seen news over the past year where people zoom in on an intraday highest price, and it's right. Technically, it's correct, right? The market has reached an intraday high, but is that the relevant price to look at? Because markets are constantly absorbing new information, people are transacting on it, etc. So it's a bit arbitrary to only look at the highest price point.
Price of the highest point.
It's not completely fair, and then we realized we had to explain that you can't just look at the highest price point on a day and say, hey, and the lowest price point for that argument, right? So you have 2 points in a day, because the market is constantly looking for where the right price level is, and compare that to the benchmark that Patrick and Lucas came up with, and we averaged. So that's one number. So it's not volatile. So is it really the case that the price discovery process is a very volatile product,
right? And
the number we came up with between ourselves is a very stable product? No, it's obviously not the case, but it's a type of discussions we need to take people through to fully start appreciating what a market is, how does it work, what do you need to look at, and how does it compare to other solutions out there? Not to disqualify the other solutions, but they may be very necessary in certain cases. But if you have access to a price discovery mechanism that's based on exchange rates, then you are hitting the high water mark.
And it's also the fact that when we get this to the retail market, which is where obviously a lot of the absolute pain is. I'm not suggesting there's not pain for, say, manufacturers when they've high gas if they've got to run a factory, but the retail market also, it's a slightly inverse situation, because utilities are in the business of pain management, I always say, because essentially they charge you a blended price over that period, that billing period. So obviously they've got to be in the business of going, you're going to pay more next quarter when prices are going up, which also then can lead to, I don't mean that they're being hysterical, they're being quite pragmatic in trying to help people understand, because they're averaging every day for what we use in our homes, rather than marking us to market every 24 hours as we would be doing, or in real time as we'd be doing at the ICE clearinghouse. But that causes a degree of problem, because then the politicians start getting worried, because talking's ahead from the gas utility says, well, we're looking at higher prices, which, do not get me wrong, he or she has to say that, because otherwise people get very upset. But it becomes a very, very rapidly politicized argument.
And you're right. The problem is very, very real. The solution is not in covering up the market.
No.
And I think that putting it like that is actually the essence of the whole MCM discussion. The problem was very real. It's very understandable that policymakers, politicians wanted to do something about it. All good intentions, but you have to be very careful that those good intentions do not lead to unintended consequences. Which we fortunately, knock wood,
have avoided in any case so far.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, certainly, I mean, there's no argument. I mean, King Canute was definitely not doing well when he tried to close the water market on his beach. And it's a fascinating pointer, because, as you say, #it's complicated. If everything was easy, then our lives would be so much simpler. We could get things sorted. But when you're dealing with, I mean, hundreds of actors in thousands of places, all trying to bring together one blended price, it starts becoming very complex. So, I mean, really, when we look at this whole thing, winter is coming, although I have to say, in a certain sense, when I look at your results, I mean, at the top level, it looks a little bit like endless summer for ICE and ICE Endex, because you're always managing to produce better volume. And what is very interesting is, as you say, that the volume is not in any way just a speculative froth. It's actually people who are looking to hedge all the way out through this curve. I mean, way beyond the level that the rest of us in our normal everyday personage conceive of our gas bills.
Yeah,
we look from quarter to quarter pretty much, if we're lucky. Some of us just end up shocked when it arrives on a particular day in the month. And that makes for an incredibly complex market. And I suppose, therefore, I have to ask you, the zillion-dollar question that we always ask at this point in this show, Lucas Schmeddes. You've explained to us that, yes, winter is coming, but it may not be as dreadful a gore fest as some people were predicting a couple of years ago, and certainly you're doing your utmost to build this market and make it coherent. But I mean, where do you think that the capital market revolution goes next?
Well, so for ICE Endex, I would say that our markets will have to play a very important role in the upcoming ambitions beyond the winter. Right, we were going through an energy transition, or at least we've committed to go through an energy transition, and those are nice words, but it means change. And as we've seen with the energy crisis, change will cause pain.
Yes,
and pain will cause knee-jerk reactions. So we have a lot of education to do, and we should do that, because we will need these markets, which provide price signals and risk management tools to get us safely through the energy transition, where we'll need a mix of gas, European emissions, and electricity, and obviously gas and European emissions. It's the ambition that those get less, but those need to be balanced, and we will hand the market participants the tools that allows them to make the investments to facilitate that energy transition.
Lucas Schmeddes, that has been a fantastic, I think, masterclass, ladies and gentlemen, in understanding everything about TTF and the market correction mechanism, what's been going on in the gas market, and indeed how sophisticated it is. What an incredible show. Winter is coming, but nonetheless, I think we can look forward to endless summer of efficient markets, thanks to the good folks of Intercontinental Exchange. It's been a pleasure to be hosted here in the ICE house. We are looking forward to a very spectacular week, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not sure how well you can possibly see this on camera, but that's going to be the weekend for Mrs. Young and I, and we're going to be with a former IPO-VID guest. It's going to be Professor Dr. Michael Manelli. He is, as of Friday afternoon, will be officially the 695th Lord Mayor of the City of London. There's a bit of tradition for you, dating back 1,000 years in history, almost, well, just about around the age of Magna Carta. I think we saw the first Lord Mayor of the City of London. So we're in London for the course of this week. It's been a delight to be here in the Ice House for this magnificent show. Next week, we've got another fantastic show. We are going to be back in the Ice House, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to be with the grand panjandrum of everything ICE Futures Europe, Chris Rhodes, the man who took over last year as the boss of this great organization. I think it's only actually the third, if I remember correctly, boss of the ICE empire from Europe. Looking forward to having Chris Rhodes from the London Ice House next week. In the meantime, my name is Patrick L. Young. I want to say a huge thank you, Lucas. That has been such a masterclass. You broke down what is truly a nightmarishly complex topic so easily. I do hope the good folks of Brussels will keep listening to you. I'm really excited to hear from you how your, for want of a better term, your term curve, your yield curve of gas keeps building out. That's incredible to be out 9 years. I want to say thank you very, very much, ladies and gentlemen, to our production team today. Thank you to Racy, Rochelin, and Janella for a seamless show. I'm going to be back next Tuesday. In the meantime, if you're craving information, don't forget Exchange Invest. It can be in your inbox Monday through Friday, and Saturdays it's even free. And of course, if you're bored, don't forget, check out our back issues. And as well as that, pick yourself up a copy of that great Dutch trading masterpiece, Confusing the Confusiones. My name is Patrick L. Young. Thank you, Lucas Schmeddes. We've been inside the Ice House discussing Winter is Coming. We'll be back next week.